So we'll just jump right in. Does anyone want to take a guess at what this clock with the 13 minutes represents? There's no wrong answers. This is a safe place. Yep, she's right on. Unfortunately, in our country, based on statistics, we lose someone to suicide every 13 minutes. Obviously, that's a very staggering number. It's concerning and something we need to be talking more about. How about the nondescript pie chart with the 90% right there? Anyone want to take a guess? They'll warn you, this is the hardest one on the screen. Anybody? 90% what? Could be prevented. She is on the right track, absolutely. 90% of people who die by suicide have or could have been diagnosed for an underlying mental illness. And again, that doesn't mean that they were diagnosed, but they could or should have been at the time of death. They say that suicide is one of the most preventable forms of death, and if we can connect people with the resources they need and identify the warning signs and the issues they're having ahead of time, we can get them the help that they need and ultimately save lives. What about the bar chart there with suicide as the second bar? Yep. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for age 15 to 24, and this is a national statistic that holds true here locally as well. And within the last couple of years in Nebraska, unfortunately, suicide, last year I guess, suicide was the first leading cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. So that is, we're seeing younger and younger attempts, ideation, and unfortunately completions. And so again, how can we reach those students and how can we have this conversation as a community and really get them the help they need? What about these pencils? Anybody? Yes?
One in every 6 kids has a mental illness.
Very close. 1 in every 6 students, grades 9 through 12, have seriously considered suicide in the last 12 months. I would argue that's actually probably closer to 2 to 3, if not 4 in some communities. That was done as a self-report study, so the students had to say that they were thinking of that. I have a daughter who's a junior in high school. I can tell you she's not always the most forthcoming when it comes to some information, and I would guess she probably wouldn't have answered yes on that if she had thought of it, depending on the situation. So again, that's probably much higher. What about the upside down car? Yes?
People die in car accidents, and with their depression if they don't watch out.
Yes, that is true. Not what we're going with here, but absolutely yes. Unfortunately, car accidents can be used as a form of a suicide attempt. Anybody else? All right, I'll give you this one. We lose just as many people each year in Nebraska to suicide as we do to car accidents. But let me ask you this. Let's say you're going to the game on Saturday morning and you're driving down I-80. What do you see on those electronic billboards? Yeah?
Amber Alert.
You see Amber Alerts? What else do you see? Yeah, the number to the day of how many people we've lost to car accidents in our state. And these clever, catchy little sayings say, click it or ticket, or stop texting and driving, stop drinking and driving, stop speeding. Whatever it may be, you see all of these things. And we're talking about traffic deaths in this way because, the solutions seem much more tangible to people. They know the answers, what to do to save lives. But when we're losing just as many people to suicide in our state, why aren't we talking about it just the same? And that leads us to the next one. We lose 3 times more people in our state to homicide than we do, or to suicide than we do homicide each year. But every time you turn on the nightly news, the local nightly news, what do you hear about? Homicides, violence, crime in our streets, and public safety. All very important things, don't get me wrong. You feel like we're not talking about suicide or mental health. Why is it still so stigmatized in our community? Yeah? Yeah?
Okay.
I'll call out your shirt colors, I guess, sorry.
I think, if you put the idea in their head, that's one of the reasons why I think people avoid talking about it. If we don't bring it up, it's going to go away. If you bring it up, that might put ideas in their head.
Yep, she's absolutely right. That's actually one of the most common myths around suicide. If we talk about it, we're going to put that idea in their head. And there's been so much research done around this, and time again, it's been proven to be a myth. I can assure you these kids, if they're not talking about it themselves, they've heard fellow students talking about it, they've heard their friends talking about it, they've seen it on TV, they've heard it in music. You're not going to put this idea in their head. They know about it already. What you're going to do is educate them and provide them a safe space to talk about it. Why else don't we talk about it?
As a parent, it's easier to cope with the things that your kids are okay and you don't have to deal with the real problem.
Yep, it's one of those things that you don't want to think, first of all, that it's ever going to happen in your house, to your family, to your children. And it's easier as a parent to be like, nope, they're okay. They don't, they're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. That's never going to be an option for them. And if it's something we don't think or talk about, it's never going to be on the table for us. Wow, what else?
I would say because somebody's already experienced your life, you don't talk about it, you feel like failure.
Yes, there is a lot of shame and guilt and failure that goes into this. It's one of those things that if it has touched you closely, you constantly wonder, what could I have done? What did I miss? And so it does. It takes a toll on family members, and you're going to hear from some after I'm done speaking. It changes your life like nothing you've ever known. And so you're constantly wondering. And on that same note, you also never know who around you has been impacted by it necessarily. So it's something we kind of shy away from because you don't know what other people's reactions are going to be. Anybody else? Yeah.
Lack of knowledge.
Absolutely. She's absolutely right. Lack of knowledge. If there's stuff we don't know about, we're not educated on, we tend not to talk about it, right? We tend not to bring it up in conversation. And this isn't something we learn about every day. So absolutely, lack of knowledge. Anything else? Yeah?
I think there's a stigma surrounding mental health and the issue itself at hand, and that in some way makes you seem weaker.
Yep.
And that is suicide is almost an easy way out, so nobody wants to talk about it.
Yep, and so she's absolutely right. There is still a stigma around mental health, not only in our community, but throughout our country. We are decades behind in research and funding and conversation and knowledge around mental health. And our goal as a foundation is how do we change society's mindset to get people to view mental illness just as we do all other medical conditions. Because it truly is a disorder of your brain, just like many other diseases. So how can we really shift that and start that conversation? You had one, sir? Yeah, it's a scary thing, right? For a number of reasons. What else? Anybody? What about cultural or religious beliefs? That can play a part in it. Any others? You guys hit most of the topics. So we'll keep moving. All right, so some of the risk factors. I always like to caution people before we start down this list that just because you see something on this list that your youth have experienced or someone you know has experienced, that does not necessarily mean that they are ever going to think about suicide or will ever attempt suicide. It's just like with anything else. The more risk factors you have, the higher at risk you are. And so physical and sexual abuse, really abuse of any kind, that can be emotional and verbal abuse as well over time, death or other traumatic events in the family, persistent serious family conflict. Teens tend to internalize a lot of stuff. So let's say they're going home to this tumultuous environment every night. Their parents are constantly fighting. Maybe they see physical abuse, maybe they don't, but there's constant fighting. And let's say for this week, the parents are fighting constantly about maybe the kid's grades, or maybe they got in trouble at school and you can't agree on how to punish them. That kid internalizes that, and oftentimes will think, you know what, if I wasn't here, they'd stop fighting. Things at home would be better. They're fighting because of me. When really, it's much bigger than that. It's not about them, but they see that sometimes. And just in general, even if it's not about them, just being around that constant conflict really takes its toll on someone. Traumatic breakups of romantic relationships. This can be true at any age, but especially with youth. They think that partner right then is their person. They can't see to college or beyond college, but they're going to meet someone else and someone better, and they're going to grow and change and meet all these people. It can be a very traumatic event for them. Trouble with the law. We hope that this never happens to any of our youth, but unfortunately we know that it does, and that can really tie into the next one. The major disappointments or school failures, and that can be, let's say they do get in trouble with the law, then let's say they're on the football team, and they're thinking about, gosh, not only did I disappoint my parents, not only am I disappointed in myself, I disappointed my coach, I disappointed my team, I disappointed my my school because now we're not going to beat Miller North next week, or maybe, you know, whoever it is. And they go down this rabbit hole of all these things that are going wrong because of their one choice. And that weighs very heavily on them. And that can tie into many, many different mistakes, whether it be trouble with the law or anything else. So it's important, I'll get right to you, important to make sure that we put those mistakes and you know, disappointments into perspective. Yes, you had a question?
So I think you might want to add, what's your list of mental illness such as ADHD?
Yeah, absolutely, and we do talk about that, certainly. Mental illness can be a risk factor for suicide, and it can be more than ADHD. It can be depression, it can be anxiety, and oftentimes when we do these presentations, we'll go 90 minutes and we tie all of that together. But yeah, we do talk about that throughout the presentation, and obviously in the opening, how mental illness can tie to these, certainly, especially if left untreated. That's a huge piece. And then the bullying, harassment, or victimization by peers. Again, I'm not going to talk a lot about this because we could have a whole other presentation, and maybe you guys have as a school district, on your anti-bullying policies. I will tell you, when we meet with the youth, the one thing that we always encourage them, even though, you know, teenagers will roll their eyes and be like, oh, that's so cheesy or whatever, how to use each interaction for positive or for good. When you're walking in the hall, give somebody a smile, or avoid saying those things or posting those things, because even if you don't think it's a big deal, you have no idea what that individual is going through, and you have no idea what else they're dealing with, and so it may be just one more thing to them. So really just trying to encourage and teach them how to use their interaction for good, both on social media and in their face-to-face interaction. And then prior suicide attempts, this again ties in as well with mental illness, but the prior suicide attempts, this is the highest risk factor. And so if they've had an attempt previously, they're at higher risk the rest of their life, but they especially say those first 6 to 12 months is a crucial time frame to make sure that they have that adequate support and that you're there for them. So some of the warning signs, these are the more symptomatic things that you're going to notice. And before, again, I read it into this list, I just want to encourage you, you know your youth best, your kids best, and you know their friends, and you know the people in your lives you know best. And so what all of this comes down to is, what is a change in their pattern of behavior? What do you see that they weren't doing before that now they're doing? And you know, teens are moody people, right? Like they can go upstairs, be in a perfectly good mood, and they come back down for dinner and they're a whole other person. You know, that happens at my house at least. I don't know if it happens elsewhere, I would think so. But, you know, they just are moody, and that's their nature, and that's okay. So you have to decipher between what is normal teenage behavior and what is a change in their pattern of behavior. And so one time frame to look for is 2 weeks or longer that these things are going on. That's not to say you're not going to have more extreme cases when it's a shorter time frame that raises concern for you. But a 2-week time frame is really good to watch for. Anxiety or agitation. Again, kids are under a lot of pressure to perform well at school. Maybe they're in the band, maybe they're in theater, maybe they're in athletics. They have a lot going on, and a lot of pressure coming from every side. So some anxiety is normal if they're sitting for the ACT or SAT. That is normal anxiety. But when that anxiety doesn't fit the situation, or it's starting to interfere with their day-to-day activities and behavior, that can certainly be a warning sign. The next two I kind of tie together: eating too much or eating too little, or sleeping too much or sleeping too little. And we always hear from parents, well, which one is it? You know, that could be either one. And again, that comes down to, what is a change in your child's pattern of behavior? Before, were they okay with 6 to 8 hours of sleep, and now they can't get out of bed after 12 or 14 hours? You know, that could be concerning. And that's not, I'm not talking like on a Friday night when they're up late and they sleep till noon on Saturday. Again, not a one-time thing, or, you know, that type of weekend thing, but when it's interfering with their life and it's a change from their normal behavior. Visiting or calling people to say goodbye. Oftentimes we hear from people that they think this is like kind of your traditional, you know, what you're going to see in the movies. They leave a handwritten note at the scene to say goodbye. Yes, that happens sometimes, but I think, you know, law enforcement, I think Sheriff Davis is going to be up here in a little bit. They'll probably attest that happens less frequently than you might think. What we're seeing is, you know, group texts from teenagers, things on technology, maybe posts on social media, you know, maybe indirect goodbyes to friends. And so you have to, we always encourage people, whatever raises a red flag for you, or you get that gut feeling, act on it. Because you'd rather act on it and be overly cautious than not cautious enough. Giving things away or returning borrowed items. So this, especially again around youth, we're seeing things with technology, maybe phones, iPads, gaming systems, pieces of gaming systems. It's usually going to be around something that the people had in common and something that they know the other person really liked or didn't have access to. One example I use frequently is if they're both into music, and let's say they both have guitars, but one has a guitar that the other has just coveted forever. And it's like, oh my gosh, and at first he gives it to him, it's like, here, why don't you hold on to this for me? And at first the kid's like, oh my gosh, yes, I've always wanted to play this is so cool, And then he starts thinking, why are you giving this to me? Again, that, gut feeling, flags start flying. If it doesn't seem a normal pattern of behavior for them, or you see your child with something new that you didn't notice before, ask them where they got it and have that conversation with them. Expressing no reason for living or no purpose in life. This can sound so many different ways. Every person is different, but it's really going to come down to that hopelessness. Why am I even here? Everyone would be better off without me. I just can't take this anymore. It's all too much. So again, this can sound many, many different ways. I'm in a very dark place. So just anything that raises that flag for you, please act on that and have a conversation. And then dramatic mood changes, positive or negative. That's pretty self-explanatory, but one thing I do want to point out, when people think of someone who's suicidal, they think, very depressed, very down, very sad, and that's true. But sometimes what you see is people who, maybe have been down for the last few weeks, and all of a sudden, you see them at dinner and they're in a great mood, they're chatty, they want to talk about what's going on at school that day, and you're just like, oh my gosh, my kid is back, I'm so happy. And they're almost like elated on this high. You have to watch out for that too, because it could be that they're in this positive flow and mood now because they've come to peace with their decision. So you really want to look for a dramatic mood change either way in a relatively quick time period. Talking, reading, or writing about suicide or death, it doesn't have to be their own death, it can be just death in general. And this is a huge warning sign for the youth population, because as adults, if we're writing, it's probably in our journal, or maybe we blog, or maybe we're doing stuff on social media, but very rarely are other people reading it, unless we have a professional artist or author in the room. I don't mean to offend you, so yes, sometimes it does happen. But youth are still turning in assignments to their teachers. They're still doing creative writing. They still have art assignments. And so teachers will tell you this is one way they really can identify students. And again, it doesn't have to be their own death. It can be just death in general and has turned very dark. We already kind of talked about the hopelessness or feelings of burden. Rage or uncontrolled anger or seeking revenge. Again, if someone has been pretty even-keeled in the past and suddenly they're flying off the handle for no reason, very angry, and that is not normally in their personality, that could certainly be an issue and something you want to talk about. Acting reckless or engaging in risky behavior. Again, this is because they don't care what the consequences are anymore. They've given up. And so this could be, as simple as, not simple, but sneaking out, to taking the car without permission, to really leaning towards alcohol and drugs, participating in risky sexual behavior, or, again, the drugs and alcohol we're seeing the most. But anything you can think of as a parent that kind of makes you cringe, that can be a risky behavior. There's a list that goes on and on, but something, again, that's out of their normal behavior that you haven't seen. We've already talked about the alcohol and drugs. And withdrawing from friends, family, and previously enjoyed activities. Typically, you're going to see this across multiple areas of their life. Kids are still figuring out who they are, what they enjoy, what they want to do. So it's not necessarily maybe, Sarah switched from friend group A to friend group B. That's not, maybe that's concerning too as a parent, but not necessarily a warning sign. But let's say Sarah either is not hanging out with anyone, or switched from friend group A to friend group B, quit the band, isn't showing up to her work, and isn't volunteering at church anymore. I mean, as a parent, that's a red flag for you. There's multiple areas of her life that are really being affected by, whatever she is going through. So some of the protective factors. The previous lists are very scary things, but it's encouraging to know as a parent and as a community, there's things we can do to build up this network around our youth to really protect them from ever thinking about this or ever following through with an attempt. And I could read this whole list to you, but I can tell you it comes down up to the community connectedness, to how connected is your child? How connected are they at school? How connected are they to their peer network? How close are their family relationships? Whatever your family looks like. How connected are they to a faith community? Are they volunteering? Are they giving back? So that if something goes wrong in one area, they have other areas that that is going to help to get them through that situation. And then these bottom two, having access to treatment. It doesn't do us any good if we identify these warning signs in someone, but then we can't get them the help that they need. I know that as a school district, you guys are very fortunate because you have services right here on site. Not every district is so lucky. So let's say we notice these in one of our youth, but we don't have insurance, or we don't have Medicaid, or we don't have a gap between to pay that. Or, you know what, I have to work and I can't get her to her appointments before 5 o'clock and nobody's open after 5 o'clock. Let's say a youth has, these signs have been identified in the youth and they have a family that doesn't support them in this. They don't believe in mental health, which sadly to this day we still have families tell us all the time that they don't believe mental illness is real. So there are kids out there that unfortunately are in these situations. So we have to make sure that we take down these barriers and get them the help that they need. And if their family isn't doing it, how can we come together as a community and really help them? And then restricted access to means. Most times people read that and they think firearms. And yes, that is a huge one and a huge thing we need to work on as a community. If you choose to be a family that has firearms in the home, that's your choice obviously, but we need to make sure to educate on how can we keep that family safe. If someone is very depressed in that home and we're concerned about them, let's remove that firearm for a short time. You can take it to law enforcement and then we'll hold on to it for you, and as long as you have a legal permit, you're not going to get into any trouble. And sometimes we hear from parents, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want, to get my family involved in the system. I don't want to, have any flags on my family or that. They'll do it. They want your family to be safe. There's free gun locks. There's free gun safes. So all these different things that we can do in terms of educating the family and community. But just as importantly, how many of you in here in the last year have had a surgery or thrown out your back and have had pain pills prescribed? All right, so maybe like a fourth of you in this room, right? And how about in the last 5 years? Even more. Okay, so what do you do with those pills? You maybe take like 1 or 2, maybe you finish it if you're in a lot of pain, and you throw them up in the medicine cabinet, right? And you forget that they're there, and you never look at them again. But your youth, they are sneaky little guys, and they're very clever, and they know that they're there. And let's say that they get really down, or they're really struggling. If they have access to that, they're going to know right where to get to that medicine cabinet and know that they're there. So there's ways we can educate, again, families and communities on how to properly dispose of medications when you're done with them. You can take them to the pharmacy and dispose of them properly. There's drug take-back days all over the community all the time. So just making sure that we can educate people on how to do that carefully and responsibly. Okay, so building resiliency. I feel like resiliency is kind of one of those buzzwords around youth, and I will tell you one of my least favorite sayings is youth are resilient. They are very resilient, but that isn't something that just comes natural to them. That is a skill they have to hone over time, and they have to face disappointment and heartbreak and failure to become resilient. I mean, that's just the nature of growing up and the nature of resilience as a whole. So these are ways, and when you read them, you're like, no kidding, I know that. But when you're in the midst of it, you don't necessarily think of these things. And so, taking care of yourself physically and emotionally, even as adults, when we're feeling better about ourselves, it's easier to problem solve. It's easier to work through a challenge. And so think about, for youth, that's just as important. The second one, I will say multiple times tonight, building relationships with trusted adults and friends. As parents, we like to think that our children are going to come to us with any issue they have. We build up these lines of communication. We always say, I'm here for you for anything, right? But if that kid sometimes, maybe they don't feel comfortable coming to you, and that's okay. You want to create an environment that they have someone in their life that they can go to. So think about, brainstorm with them as adults, or what other adults are in their life that they can go to if it's not you. Is there an aunt? Is there an uncle? Is there a grandma? Is there a coach? Is there a mentor? Is there a counselor at school? Is there a pastor? Who is that in their life that they can turn to when things get really hard, if it isn't you? Maintaining an optimistic attitude. Again, if we're feeling better about things, if we're looking on the bright side, it's easier to problem solve and get through things. Learning from past experiences. We all make mistakes every day. Kids are no different, right? The thing is, and they may make the same mistake just as we make, five times in a row. as long as we're learning from that and trying something different and building on that, that helps build our resiliency within us. And again, I don't need to go through this whole list, but you get the idea. Really engaging in healthy habits and feeling good about ourselves and really building that up in our youth will help them. So coping skills. What are some, again, I don't like to just read the list. I'd rather hear from you guys. So what are some healthy coping mechanisms that you encourage? So just in case we don't know. So coping mechanisms, I guess I should back up, are those things that really help us work through stress, that help you get through those challenging times. So what are some things that you guys encourage your youth to do that are healthy coping mechanisms? Sports, any physical activity really. Yep, in the back.
Writing poetry.
Writing, poetry, any creative writing and journaling, absolutely. Yeah.
Drawing.
Drawing, any artistic outlet, absolutely. Anybody else?
Baking.
Baking, that's a great one. Talking it out either with parents, friends, whoever it may be, counselor. Yeah? Music, yes, either listening to music or playing music. Yes, breathing exercises can be huge for youth. Relaxation, meditation, yoga, any of those things. What else? Yeah, any faith. Yeah, a faith-based group that they can be a part of, activities, youth groups. What else? God, just getting some fresh air. Does that ever do any good for you guys? Just taking a step outside, getting fresh air? Yeah?
I would say if you have an animal that you love to cuddle with.
I was just going to say that one, for sure. How many of you have pets? Yes, encourage your kid to take the dog for a walk around the block. Go run around the backyard with them. Really, the idea is just anything to remove them from the situation in a healthy way to help get their mind off it, come back with a fresh mind, and really work through that. What about some negative coping skills? And not your kids individually, since there's school people in here, but what are some ways that you participate in negative coping skills? What? Did you have one? Yeah, a reaction, an explosion, kind of negative reaction to it. Cutting, self-harming in any way. I would say that's negative. Kids would disagree. Yeah, Netflix is great if you want to get lost for like maybe an hour or two, take your mind off stuff. But when they're binging for like 10, 12 hours a time, I would say that's a negative coping mechanism.
I would say one negative thing that I do is like put myself down.
Yeah, beat yourself up, put yourself down emotionally, verbally, just in your thoughts. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies, right? Who else? Yelling, acting aggressively, yes. Yes, attention-seeking behaviors. Yes, using their eating habits to control their anxiety or situation they're going through, either eating too little or eating too much, for sure. Anybody else? You get the idea, right? Drugs and alcohol is a huge one we normally hear. Anything to kind of numb their pain or just not think about it. And sometimes people think, that's normal teenage behavior. It's not. Unfortunately, as a society, sometimes we've gotten there, but it's certainly not, and it can be very negative for that person. You have one more?
Yeah, trying to take your own life.
Absolutely. Attempting suicide, self-harm, anything like that would definitely be a negative coping mechanism. So you get the idea. So one thing I also encourage youth when I do these with them to do, and I would encourage you to go home and ask them to do this, and again, they're kind of like, oh, Mom, come on. But ask them to make a list of 5 things, and that phone is like a fifth limb to them, so pull out their phone and get in their notes or wherever they keep their stuff, and ask them, make a list of 5 things that make you feel good, or that when you're in crisis or feeling really bad is going to help you come out of that, or make you feel better. Because when they're in that moment of crisis or when they're feeling overwhelmed, it's not as easy for them to rattle off those things that make them feel good, or think of the people that they need to be around to feel better. So encourage them to make that list, keep it on their phone, put it in their wallet, keep it in their backpack, whatever it may be. Yeah, sometimes she said to help them practice these coping skills. Again, sometimes people think these are no-brainers and are such natural things, but if they're not something you work into your daily routine and until they become habit, they don't come so easily to you. So make sure you're practicing and teaching your youth to use these. Okay, so how to help. So again, this is such overwhelming stuff, and I had a parent last week, I was doing this with a group of parents, and they're like, so what, do we just put our kids in therapy today and just leave them in there forever? Because it's just overwhelming and everything. I'm like, no, take a step back. There's ways, again, that we can really get through these situations and help. And the first thing is, you just learn the warning signs. So I already had said, suicide is a very preventable form of death. You need to know the warning signs, but most importantly, when you identify those warning signs, where can we connect them to get them the help that they need? So knowing the resources in the community, and we're going to get to some of those here. Take any thoughts or comments about suicide very seriously. Unfortunately, from parents and teachers, oftentimes we hear from people, oh, they just are looking for attention. They don't really mean it. They always say that. And so what I say to a parent or teacher that tells me that is, well, what if they do mean it this time? And you don't act on it. And then, think about how you're going to feel and the guilt that you're going to feel and hold on to because you didn't act on it because you thought they were looking for attention. You need to take it very seriously every time and get them the help, because that isn't a normal reaction for someone to say, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to do this, and look for that all the time. That isn't a normal reaction or thing to say. So obviously there's some other underlying things going on. Encourage your children to never keep suicide a secret. So especially with youth, what we hear a lot of times is that they, so-and-so, let's say my best friend is Sarah. Sarah said this, but she said I couldn't tell anyone, she's so mad at me, oh my gosh, I can't say anything. And, she's never going to talk to me again. So what we say to them, and this is really hard for them to hear, would you rather have Sarah here and mad at you next week or not here at all? And that is hard for them to hear, but it's an important fact to drive home to them. That friend is going to forgive them. That friend is going to, realize at some point that they helped them and realize, that they're healthy now because of them. Again, even if it's someone, that it's not your child, and I hope none of you are ever touched by this, but let's say it's a friend or a college roommate and they come to you, more so like now in high school, you have a responsibility as a parent, as a fellow, community member, to do something about that. So if you don't have a relationship with that parent, you don't feel comfortable calling them and saying, you know what, she said this tonight, and I don't know what it means, I don't know if it means anything, but I just thought you would want to know, because I would want to know. Call the school and let them know. Let somebody know that can call that student and family in and get them the help that they need. Never leave that individual alone. So again, if you think, oh, well, they're okay overnight, they're going to go to school tomorrow and someone's going to talk to them. They're not okay. You don't know how long they're going to be okay. So just never leave them alone, even for a minute. And then this next one is very easy to remember. Act, acknowledge, care, tell. Acknowledge what that person is going through, because to them it is very real. So even if you have two students that face the same situation and one's like, I got this is life, it's okay, let's keep moving forward, and you have another one that it just weighs heavily on and it really pulls them down. You never know who's going to react how to what. So make sure that you acknowledge to them it's very real. Care that they opened up to tell you, again, because it was very difficult for them to do, and tell. If you don't feel confident or equipped to do this with this individual, tell someone who can bring them in. I know I'm running short on time because the panel's all here, so I'm trying to get through these. All right, we're going to skip this one. All right, so how to have the conversation. So talking points. Again, I encourage you to visit the 13minutes.org website, because it has all those risk factors and warning signs, and you can scroll over them, and it'll give you real-life examples of what that looks like. But it also gives you talking points. And I could read through this all again, but the one thing I can leave you with is it's okay to ask the question. It's okay to say, are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? You're not going to put that idea in their head, and you're not, maybe they're not, but at least you ask the question. And sometimes we hear from parents say, well, it's easier for me to say, are you thinking of harming yourself? Are you going to hurt yourself? And that is easier to get out in normal conversation. But I can tell you, if you ask someone who's suicidal, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Their answer is going to be no. Because to them, they're finally going to end the pain that they're in. Their hurt is not going to be happening anymore. And so their answer is going to be no. But if you ask them, are you thinking of suicide? They're going to say yes. And they're probably usually pretty forthcoming with that information. So be very direct. And if you have concerns, The second to last one, if you have concerns, be specific about what those are. You know, I've noticed you've done this, this, and this, or you said this. You know, what's going on? What's happening with you? What can I do to help? And then this other one, active listening. You don't have to have the answers, and I can tell you most of us will not have the answers unless we're trained in this. And mental health experts. They need someone to listen, and they took the time to reach out, so be there. You don't have to have the answers, and it's okay to say, you know what, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to be here for you every step of the way, and we're going to get through this together. And then again, it's okay to say, I want you to live. I love you. I care about you. I want you here. You're not alone in this. I always tell people, don't overwhelm them with like, you know, you have A, B, C, D, E, and F to live for. What would you know, think about what that's going to do to so-and-so. They're already feeling enough guilt and shame as it is, so don't add to that. It is okay to say, I want you to live. I care about you. And then law enforcement, again, is going to talk about this in a bit, but if they are in danger, in immediate danger, either themselves or someone else, it's okay to call 911. We often hear from parents, I don't want to get my youth in trouble. If they're not doing anything illegal, they're not going to get in trouble. They're going to get the help that they need. They are going to, you know, likely be taken to a manual or somewhere to get them the help that they need, or crisis response may be called, but they're not going to be necessarily in trouble. And that's why we bring law enforcement with us, so that we can really personalize that side for you and teach you, you know, from their perspective, what they see and how they can help families. Ongoing support, again, just being a support as a community, being there for families who are experiencing this, because what we hear from survivors oftentimes is, you know, when my brother died from cancer, everybody brought casseroles, but when my son died by suicide, nobody showed up. It's important to be supportive of that family. They're going through so much, and they need you as a community and as a school community as well. How many of you in here have younger students? Oh, okay, so a good portion, so this is important. So sometimes people say, well, I don't want to, they're too young, I don't want to talk about suicide. I can tell you within the last year, we had a mother of a 6-year-old call us at the foundation and say that her daughter was already self-harming and thinking of suicide. 6 years old. We have had an 8th grader this year die by suicide in our community. We have many who attempt who are younger. It's never too young to talk about suicide with someone. It's about how you talk about it, and you need to know your child best and what words to use with that. And again, you can find some of that on our website, but never feel like I can't talk to my 4th or 5th grader about this, because again, you'd rather have that information come from you than have them hear it somewhere else. Okay, so resources, because this is super important. So we already talked about 13minutes.org. And then the Suicide Lifeline, 800-273-TALK. I rattle that number off probably 25 times a day, but I can tell you if it's my mom or my sister or my daughter sitting in front of me, I might not be able to remember that so much. So put it in your phone so you always have it. Go to the resource booths out there. There's bracelets, stress balls, wallet cards, these little handy one-sheeters that have all the warning signs and risk factors and all these things for you, so you don't have to take notes right now. And then the Boys Town National Hotline, Julie is here with us, and she's going to be on the panel as well. They are a wonderful resource right here in Omaha, and they have both online chatting and texting available to students, because as we know, sometimes teens, they don't like to talk on the phone, right? I'm not sure my daughter even knows how to dial out on a phone, but she really is going to like to use the online and texting, so Julie's going to talk about some of that with you here on the panel. The Nebraska? Uh-oh, I lost my mic. I'll just talk really loud. Unless this one works. The Nebraska Family Helpline. You can call this again for any reason. Students can call this, parents can call this. The National Crisis Text Line, 741-741, that is available to people 24/7. And the Trevor Project, I always like to touch on that, is for the LGBTQ community. It has a wealth of information, and that hotline can be used for anything. The My3 app, I wanted to point that out. That is, if, with your permission, of course, encourage your students to download that on their phone. And it, again, is the 3 people that they know have their back and that they can turn to when in a crisis or when faced with something. OkToTalk.org is a website geared towards teens. One thing I really love about this is it's in English and Spanish, and we don't have enough of those resources. And it's all very teen-based around depression and anxiety. And then again, we all say as parents, you know, they can come to me for anything, but having that true open door policy, true, you know, open lines of communication policy within your family, and work to create that. But most importantly, set your ego aside if it's not you that they come to. I know that can be really hard, but just be grateful that they go to someone and have this conversation. And then this last quote I really appreciate, because as parents, we're going in so many different directions, and oftentimes, you know, the kids, they don't want to talk when we want to talk, and we're just exhausted and worn out, and after dinner, we're just like, oh my gosh, okay. But make sure, take care of yourself. Self-care is very important, because as the quote says, you can't serve from an empty vessel, and we all know we have a lot of expectations on us as well. And one thing too, on that other one about the open door and open lines of communication, you know, I always kind of tease my daughter because I like to talk, you know, when I'm at my best, like after work, at dinner, whenever, you know, when I have slept. She'll walk in the door at 10:15 from dance, and that's when she wants to talk. And it's so easy for me to say, Liv, come on, let's talk tomorrow, I'm tired, you know, and I've caught myself doing that. And it's important to talk to them when they're ready to talk, because we all know as parents of teenagers, that may not be when we want to talk, and it may not be at the most convenient times, but we need to make sure we're there for them and available to talk when they are ready. With that, I don't think we have time for this. What time is it? Okay, we're gonna go through them really fast. Half hour for panel. Okay, just shout it out, fact or fiction. 50% of mental illness begins by age 14 and 75% by age 24. That is a fact, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily diagnosed, but they could or should have been diagnosed by that time. Approximately 50% of students living with mental illness age 14 or older drop out of high school. That is a fact. Good job. Most people don't get that one. Unfortunately, that is the highest dropout rate of any disability group in our country. I would argue that here locally we're doing much better than that, because we put tools in place, set aside the truancy laws and all of the higher dropout ages, but we've put a lot of positive resources in place for our students to graduate and get through as they need it. Suicide is the 5th leading cause of death in high school and college students.
Fact?
Fiction. What is it?
Second.
Second, yes. There are more suicides in Nebraska than homicides. See, I gave you some of these before. About 25% of those who engage in self-harm begin around age 14 and carry into their 20s. Sadly, that is a fiction. It's depending on which data you look at, closer to 50 to 60%, and I would argue starts well before age 14. All those who self-harm are having suicidal thoughts. Fiction, good job. People self-harm for many, many different reasons. So it's important, certainly someone could be working up to that, but it's important not to jump to that conclusion necessarily. More females attempt suicide than males. That is true, it's a fact. More males complete suicide, die by suicide than females. That is a fact. 4 times more, actually. Anybody know why? They use more lethal means, typically. So that is, okay, and then lastly, we didn't go over this, but using the words die by suicide is more appropriate than commit suicide.
False.
Who said that? You're cheating, you already know the answer. Okay, that is a fact. So what are 2 things that we commit? Crimes and? Sins. I don't know, someone say sins, okay. Sins, yes. And survivors, and so just a tidbit of information, a suicide survivor is different. If you're a cancer survivor, you're someone who has lived through cancer, you're healthy, you're in remission. If you're a suicide survivor, that means you've lost someone to suicide, lost a loved one. And so they will tell you that just furthers the stigma, the shame, the guilt, everything that they're feeling when the community looks at it that way, puts it on the same playing field as sins and crimes. And also, have you ever heard anyone say someone committed cancer or committed a heart attack? No, right? We never hear that. So just like someone dies from a heart attack, dies from cancer, they die by suicide. So sometimes people think, it's not that big a deal, it's just a word. But language is especially as educators in the room, language can be a very powerful thing. And so this is one quick, easy fix that I would encourage all of you to try and work on as we leave from here. So with that, I'm going to bring the panel up now.
I'm a suicide loss survivor. I've lost both my sister and my significant other. My sister Amy was bipolar, but my family didn't believe in mental health. We didn't believe in counseling. We believe in hard work and dedication. medication and working through things. So she never got the treatment that she needed, and instead she chose to self-medicate and treat herself with different types of drugs. Sure, is that better? It sounds so loud up here. So my sister turned to drugs instead because she wasn't getting the help she needed, which spiraled into a downward path. But she did get her life together finally in her early 20s, and she had a little boy and seemed really good until the morning I got up to go to SAT prep, and my mom just said, Amy died last night. Just like it was nothing. We didn't have a funeral. We never talked about her again. There are no pictures of my sister anywhere that I could find. It just disappeared. It was so shameful to my family that it was like she never existed. So as a young person, at 16, that teaches me a lot about what parents really think about their children. It's a very confusing time, and obviously people react to things poorly sometimes. But then when suicide came into my life a second time, totally shocked, but I wasn't gonna let that happen again. So I met Brian at New Student Orientation in college. 18 years later, we were having a great life. He was a professional firefighter. He was a licensed counselor. He was the kind of person that everyone loves and always was giving hugs and always volunteering, and everybody knew him, and he was always there for you, except apparently we weren't there enough for him. Totally blindsided me. I was completely aware of suicide, but here it was, waking next to the same person every morning. I had no idea that was what he was planning. But when Brian died, I refused to let what happened to Amy happen to him. And from day one, when people asked me what happened, I would tell them. And I would talk about suicide, and I started doing things like this, coming out into the community and talking to people, so that we don't let Amy's happen again. We don't let families fall by the wayside. I feel like it's something he would have done, and so I feel like I do that on his behalf. I'll give you my 10 cents on 13 reasons, though, while I have the microphone. And that is that I think you should watch it or read it. I think parents have more to gain from it than kids do. As an adult, I got a lot out of it in terms of, we tend to think that we know everything going on in kids' life, and in the story you watch the progression of the parents being like, I know everything in my kid's life, meanwhile all this stuff is going on in the background. So that's my 10 cents on it.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Davis, and I'm the sheriff here in Sarpy County. And I want to talk about 4 things very quickly. And I want to tell you in advance that what I have to say has probably not been clinically tested. These are things that I've observed over 40 years. And in that 40-year period, I don't have a number, but I can tell you that many, too many times, I've been directly or indirectly involved with a suicide, whether it be when I started as a call taker, an investigator, a first responder, an investigator in the corner. And so in that time period, some things surfaced that I think are important for you to know. It doesn't happen every time. It doesn't exist every time, but predominantly these are things that I think they're things you should watch for. Number one, I think that it is good for you to say to your children or your significant other that they can tell you anything, and is different to mean it. And if you mean it, that's something you really got to think about. And I'll tell you, I've met people that say, no, my kids can tell me anything, and then the tragedy happens where the young boy in Iowa kills 4 people on a motorcycle, and they say, oh, that was my son, I'm writing him off tomorrow. You don't mean it. You have to really think hard, and you have to mean it, that your kids can tell you anything. And then even then, there are some cases where it wasn't the parents the kids couldn't tell, it was their peers. They were afraid to tell somebody else that they knew. So I don't have the answer for that, but I think it's extremely important that your kids know they can tell you anything, and you will listen. You can't tell them, you won't get mad or upset, but you will listen and you will work through it with them. Another thing that I noticed, doesn't happen every time, it's happened sometimes. After the fact, talking to family members or friends or a loved one, they will say, you know, I knew something was going on, they were down, I worried about it, I was losing sleep over it, but just the other day, yesterday, last week, one of their friends told me they had gone out to dinner with them. And I knew everything was okay, so much so that it was like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. I knew it was over, whatever it was. And now this. Well, the fact is, again, not clinical, but I believe that is when that person made the decision after months, weeks, or maybe even years of torment. This is how they were going to handle it. There was never light at the end of the tunnel. And in fact, when they made the decision, this is what I'm going to do, the weight of the world was lifted off their shoulders for them. Just a thing that I think is important to know, that even when, I think they mentioned it up here, even when things seem good sometimes, maybe they're not. You have to be aware of that. I also want to tell you a number of times, not every time, but a number of times, either in a note or in our investigations, it has come down to an individual or a girl or a boy that was gay. And so, because of religion, I'm Catholic, I was raised that that is a sin, and my family certainly wasn't going to tolerate that ever. And so, we, especially here in the Midwest, we built up this wall, incredible wall, that seems insurmountable to some young person who may be gay. And a number of times, it was simply, they couldn't come out with it. And so I think that's something you need to be aware of. If you have those thoughts, you should think about it, because that, my friends, is a fact. You know, there are gay people out there. There's nothing wrong with those people. And if we don't open our arms to them and say it's okay, I'm telling you, that's a consistent thing that I've seen over a number of years that we need to work on. The last thing I want to tell you, this was mentioned up here, there were 3 suicides to every homicide. I think that's what I remember. And you didn't know that. I know you didn't know that because for a while I didn't know it. And the reason you don't know it is because they are not publicized. So that brings me to this, and later on you can tell me what you think. We do not publicize suicides. I don't think you could ever talk me into doing that. We work with the schools closely. I think that's a joint decision not to do that. Back in 1985, it made national news in Sarpy County. 5 people committed suicide. It was a chain reaction, and each one was publicized. So we made a decision, we're just not going to do that anymore, because that idea is thrown out there to some young adult or young person as an alternative. They see it, they say, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Now the problem is, I don't have the answer for this either. With social media today, once an incident like that happens, I'm not kidding you, literally, in 15 minutes, half those person's friends know, a lot of the people in the school know, most of those kids know before the school administrators and some of the law enforcement know. So I don't have the answer for that. I think it's the right thing not to put that out there. I'm afraid that there are kids that are looking for an answer, and when you do that, that's what they see as the answer. I'd be interested in your views on that. Thank you.
My son went to high school here, and 2 years ago he was in college, and I had no idea that he was struggling so much. He covered it up very well. He was always really an outgoing guy, very compassionate, very loving. We are gun owners. We have guns in our house that are locked up. He didn't use one of ours. He bought one. He didn't like guns. He didn't like hunting. It turns out he did share some of his thoughts with some of those close to him. They didn't take it seriously. They never dealt with somebody that was, suicidal. So I'm looking back, I'm sure they just thought, oh, that's just, just how many times do you say, I'm so frustrated, I don't want to live anymore. And so, yeah, he decided to leave here. And there are red flags looking back, but at the time, they just don't seem like red flags. He was in college. Ended up not seeing him as often because of him being in college. He would talk about, oh, I'm stressed, but you know what? I just have to get through this first week of school. He was talking about the future. He was talking about reffing basketball with his dad. He was talking about what he was going to do next summer. Up until the afternoon before he died. I don't know how you pick up the red flags when you don't think that someone you love can think like that. And out of all 4 of my children, he would have been the last one I would have ever worried about was something like that. So really try to be as in tune as you can with your kids, and make sure that you stay real close to them and let them know that, they can tell you anything. I know the last thing I said to my son was the most beautiful part of my life. Is being your mom, and I'm glad I said it. Just make sure you say stuff like that every day to them, and that may help. Just say it every day until they're sick of hearing it. But just make sure that they know.
Good evening. My name is Julie Bloomingdale, and I work at the Boys Town National Hotline. And this is my 28th year there. And I'm here and humbled to be at the table with these fine folks who are offering so much of their experience to help you, stay in tune with your own kids so that they never hopefully reach the point where they consider suicide as an option. And it means a lot that all of you are here tonight because this is an important issue. And by being here, you're open to the message. And hopefully your children are here too, receiving a similar message. And the hotline is a 24-hour crisis line that's available 365 days a year, 24/7 for both kids and parents who might be struggling. And our goal is to help the individual just kind of problem solve through whatever situation they're going through. Acknowledge those feelings. Do what we can, especially when the youth call, to pick up on things that they're saying, reinforce them for good decisions that they're making, because it is amazing the effect that just those small statements can have in a conversation. You can kind of hear their self-esteem boost up a little bit. So in addition, the hotline was created in 1989, and since then, technology has changed. We still have the phone available 24/7, but we know kids aren't picking up the phone to call. So we want to stay accessible to them in ways that they are comfortable reaching out. So about 9 years ago, we created a website. It's called yourlifeyourvoice.org that is meant to be a one-stop resource for teens and young adults that they can go to get information about the wide variety of issues that they deal with on a regular basis, from friendships to anxiety to depression to suicide. You name it, we have information on there. And again, hopefully they're looking at that information, maybe when they're not in a time of crisis, learning ways that they can cope, reading examples of other people who have struggled, seeing the response that counselors have provided, so that without even reaching out for help, they're getting ideas on how they might be able to handle similar situations in the future. We also have online chat available in the evenings, and our most recent addition has been texting services. And this definitely has been, we've seen an increase in the kids reaching out for help by text. And so again, we want to remain accessible in ways that they are comfortable, and we try to normalize with kids. Life is a roller coaster. You're going to have good days and you're going to have difficult days. And empowering them to identify those coping skills and support systems in their life, who they can turn to during those difficult times, and letting them know with every obstacle that you overcome, you're building that resiliency that Julia talked about. And so our hope is to give them hope that things can change and that things can get better.